Welcome to Champions of the Lost Causes. I'm your host, Marvin Stockwell, and today I'm here with Linda Zebian, Senior Director of Communications for Muck Rack. Linda, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Marvin. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So, and I should say here at the outset that we are on the second annual Champions of the Lost Causes podcast summer road trip. Yeah. And we're here in, tell me the name of the city we're in.
Well, it's a small town called Wilbraham, Massachusetts.
Wilbraham, Massachusetts. I'd never heard of Wilbraham.
Yes.
But
home of Friendly's ice cream. If you've ever had Friendly's,
I haven't.
Ice cream. Okay, I think it's an East Coast thing, up and down the eastern coast. They're famous for their cone head.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I got to swing by then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's not what it used to be, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the joy of being out here on the road is just seeing the regional differences, which as much as people say we live in a homogenized society and all this stuff, there's still plenty of regional differences, actually.
Agreed.
So we're out here on our podcast road trip. And, when I started the podcast, it was really to examine why do people champion causes? What sustains them? What helps them succeed? But what I've done with the podcast road trip is just to get out of my hometown of Memphis and get out there and make sure that I'm visiting the rest of the country to see work going on all across the country. What I wanted to talk to you about, and I should say, Muck Rack is a sponsor of this podcast, and so I have a relationship with Muck Rack. Should probably check that at the door. But that's really only an extension of the fact that I am a huge fan of the platform, and I would have said that before any sponsorship agreement was true. And that's because I've used Muck Rack and I value it as a platform. And as I've gotten to know people in the company, I've gotten to know what they care about. And it matters to me that Muck Rack goes the extra step to build rapport and to build community with journalists and with PR pros like me. And it seems like it is all at the service of better connecting those two worlds and better serving both of their needs. Here at the outset, could you just talk a little bit about Muck Rack, the company, how it came into being, and how you came to it, and what you're tasked with doing?
Yeah, sure. So Muck Rack started in 2009 as a way for journalists to connect on social media, because at that time there was no way. The co-founders of the company of Muck Rack, Greg Gallen and Lee Semmel, noticed that a lot of journalists were on Twitter, but they weren't sure how to find each other. So they decided to sort of take the journalist data and put it into an easy to manage, easy to use database of journalist information and contact information so journalists could connect. It became very popular very quickly at the time. 10,000 journalists signed up in the first year to use Muck Rack. And then they kept hearing from PR folks like me, I use Muck Rack to find the most accurate information on journalists so I can reach out to them about news that I have. So it was then that they realized, we have something here and potentially we could serve an industry we weren't even considering at onset. So they decided to build basically PR workflow tools and layered it onto the database. And the database just kept getting bigger and bigger as media changed and more journalists were using Muck Rack. And they started to charge PR people. We still have customers from the very first go at becoming a SaaS tool. And we are a software as a service tool. Mm-hmm. We are used by large to small, big Fortune 500 enterprises to, individual PR folks who are in small agencies, large agencies, all over the world. And basically Muck Rack is software that helps PR people connect with journalists, get their stories out there, pitch relevant journalists, monitor the news. So they're monitoring for mentions of their brand or other competitor brands or any sort of news trend that they're looking to follow. And then we offer analytics and reporting on how your media relations efforts are going and how they're impacting the bottom line.
Right. It's interesting. It's easy to say, you're a PR pro, I'm a PR pro. We know how it works, but just in listening to your answer back, I think a lot of people don't realize how much goes into the relationship with a PR person and a journalist, and why it matters so much. There are a million people with a million story ideas, and journalists only have so much time. And it helps you be more successful if you can build rapport with journalists. And what Muck Rack does is make it so easy to investigate a journalist, and all their contact information, all their social handles are right there at your fingertips, including all of their coverage. So you can quickly, kind of read up on a person. I think that's important. I should phrase this as a question. Why is it important such that PR pros can, instead of blasting information at 1,000 journalists, that to me is disrespectful, and it also wastes a lot of people's time. I feel like Muck Rack gives PR pros the opportunity to kind of like zero in their pitches in a little bit better and be more respectful of the journalist's time. Is that what you see?
Yeah. I mean, so our goal really is for journalists to have the most important stories and the best information on the stories and people and places in the news, making the news. And we want PR pros to be as successful as they can when they're pitching journalists story ideas. So it's a two-way street, and it's building relationship at the center, because really we both need each other, and it's an ecosystem that has to kind of be healthy, if you will, regardless if journalists want to admit it or not, right? It's not always a one-way relationship. It's not always the PR person pitching the journalist, hey, I have this great business that's thriving, or hey, I have this great event coming up. Would you please, would you be interested in covering the event for XYZ reason? A lot of the times journalists need to contact a PR person or connect with them and say, hey, I saw you're in the news. Could you provide comment? Could you provide images? Could you provide, it's that Chiron, right? You watch television at night and you say X company came out and said this. The way that quote gets to the media is via a PR or communications professional, whether they're in government, nonprofit, for-profit, they work for an agency that represents multiple brands. That's how it gets there. And a lot of people don't understand that that's how it gets there. There's a rep for the brand, there's a rep for the company, there's a rep for the individual, whatever it may be, who liaises between the media and the brand or company or individual. Right. So, and there's a lot of strategy involved in that a lot of people don't realize as well. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right to flag that it is a two-way street. It's not just the PR pros or the petitioners of the journalists. It is that too. But I know that in the pandemic, when I was at St. Jude, all of a sudden, every other topic that wasn't the pandemic got shoved to the side, and everyone wanted infectious diseases people. So it was a fortunate thing that St. Jude had such a deep bench of infectious diseases clinicians and academics, so that we could field them, because we got lots of reactive coverage. And that's where the bridge of trust and the rapport that you have with journalists pays off, because if you've built a rapport to always delivering what you say you're going to in a timely fashion, then they realize, oh, Stockwell at St. Jude is a guy I can trust. I'm going to reach out to him with his story idea. Now, and you mentioned there in your answer about how whether journalists want to admit it or not. I remember, I have a journalism degree, and when my wife was going to graduate school up in the Chicago area, I worked as a features editor and section editor at the Northwest Herald in Crystal Lake, Illinois. And we had these regular reporter editor meetings. And there was this really old school newspaper guy that was nearing retirement. And so this would have been 2003. So, and his attitude about PR people was that kind of classic antiquated opinion of PR pros that from the 80s and 70s, that PR folks are hacks who are flacks that couldn't hack it as a journalist. So they went into PR. But I just think that even then that was a fading vestige type of opinion. And then obviously as media outlets have downsized, fewer and fewer journalists are doing more and more work. I feel like that is all the more people need
essentially a roadmap. Muck Rack is essentially a roadmap to navigate that relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think the most recent number is, I think, 6 PR pros to every 1 journalist. So,
wow.
Yeah. So what does that mean for, journalism and public relations? It means, like you mentioned earlier, really targeted one-on-one pitching, a high regard for PR pros to have for the journalism industry and vice versa. It means saving the journalist's time, whether, you do that, they can do that on their own with AI tools. Or, I always advise folks who work for me is to anticipate the journalist's need. So,
right.
Don't send 14 emails back and forth trying to schedule an interview. Give the times of your person who is available up front. I have these times with this person on these dates. What works for you? I'll send you a calendar invitation. Boom, they send a time back. You're done. That's 2 emails. You could go back and forth and waste a lot of time. Anticipate what data they might need, anticipate what images and ancillary, multimedia they might need, and say, hey, here's a link. If you want it, there's actually a video of this event here for your use. There's some B-roll here from our company. Here's the person's bio that you're going to be talking to. Don't make them ask for it. Think like they think.
Absolutely.
That's the key.
That was always my entry level strength as a guy who was a journalist. When I changed seats, I understood the journalists' pressures.
Yeah. And they're higher than they've ever been. Not to mention just lack of funding, consolidations of newsrooms, but the entire trust misinformation problem, lack of news literacy, not just the United States, but globally, the distrust in news, and news people. The murdering of journalists in war zones and the lack of regard for that press vest, if you will. The more and more governments taking over kind of the voice of the country. And I think a lot of folks don't understand the importance of a free and independent press for what it means for a free society.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that is actually backing us up to the very cause that I really want to explore. I mean, I love the platform, and I personally, as a PR pro, am interested in the relationship between PR folks and journalists. And I think to a degree, your layperson would be as well. But really, as a person with a journalism degree and as a PR pro, I care about the health of a free press. Last summer's podcast road trip, I interviewed an editor and a publisher at a tiny town in tiny Boulder, Montana. It's not tiny, but it's small, and it's the type of town where there was a really concerted effort to put a daily newspaper where there otherwise would be a news desert. I've lamented the fact that the small weekly paper I worked with as a young reporter is gone. The Daily Memphian executive editor Eric Barnes, he's the paper he worked at starting out is gone. So, and we know the stats, right? Lots of different newspapers are folding. Can you talk a little bit just about your thoughts on that and the harm that it's doing in terms of an informed society? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what do you think the problem is, and then I guess a part 2 to that would be, what are some of the efforts how is Muck Rack working intentionally to kind of address that stuff, either through making the platform better, how would you? Yeah. So I think you're seeing a lot of different issues impacting newsrooms, but we've been dealing with these issues, like different versions of problems in news media, for the better part of the last 15 years that Muck Rack's been around. First, you had the rise of the digital newsroom, the Vices, the Vox, the BuzzFeeds of the world, and what did that mean for traditional news? You had the rise of the social medias taking away audience from the traditional media, which is still a problem. You see the consolidation or the eradication of local news as well. So I think if you're just a regular person, not in the news and in the media industry, to think about how much it costs, think about all the subscriptions that you pay for entertainment, and think about, could I take a fraction of that and put it up against
put it towards my local newsroom, my local newspaper. Television's a little bit of a different animal, I think, in terms of local TV. They still do pretty well. But I'm talking about like your investigative newsroom, who's going to cover your local politics, who's going to cover local crime in your area, and education and things that matter to your community. If no one is holding power into account, even at the smallest town, village level, then, folks, this is the reason why we have a free press in the United States. It's the reason why it's part of our Constitution. And if you don't have it, you're really no better than any kind of country where the government basically controls the media. And I think it's a really slippery slope to not preserve independent media. And the way to preserve independent media is for consumers, regular folks, to put their money towards supporting this cause.
Right.
And then in terms of what we do at Muck Rack to support the media, like kind of go back to our roots of who we are, is we give the Muck Rack tool and all of the data for free to journalists. And we've made that commitment to sustain that free tools for journalists forever. And so we will always be committed while PR teams are paying well into the thousands of dollars to access Muck Rack. We work with journalists to maintain the best database in the industry, and we encourage journalists to use Muck Rack's free tools. And not only does that help the journalists get better pitches and more relevant pitches, but and help the PR people get better stories and reach the right journalists for their story. Journalists can use their Muck Rack profile as a portfolio. So
that's right. Yeah.
So we collect all of their stories for them. We can alert them when their byline is published. That's particularly helpful if you're a freelancer, if you're working for multiple publications. You can set up alerts for yourself. You can set up alerts for other journalists or topics you may be interested in, get them right into your inbox. You can share your Muck Rack link. You can put it on your byline and say, check out all my work at Muck Rack. So it's a lot about self-promotion of journalists and media organizations now that I think is beyond, having consumers pay for news, the antidote to the social platforms coming in and kind of influencer stuff and all of that kind of wild west of information and content sharing, and bring it back to themselves. So what I mean by that is, okay, you've got your Muck Rack profile, you can, show folks all of your work, but also having an online presence, a social presence as a journalist, right? Journalists are almost the antidote to influencers, right? They are trained, they are committed to the truth. They have been trained to pull on threads and investigate and do their best. Not every journalist is the best at it, to remain impartial and just give you the facts on a moment. They understand what their audience is looking for. So as a journalist, I know they're all strapped extremely thin, my advice would be to create an online presence. People are looking for information and news on social, on TikTok, wherever they are. So get on there. Get the people's misinformation spreading all over social. So get on there.
Right.
Town Gazette. Get on there. Radio anchor, and show your face and show who you are and say, I was here when this happened and this is what I saw. It's almost like going back to really the roots of journalism and being that boots on the ground reporter, that eyewitness vibe, if you will. And I think that there is a lot of potential.
As a PR pro with my own publicity practice, I'm proud to be partnering with my friends at Muck Rack, an all-in-one platform that helps me build rapport with journalists and land timely media coverage. Not only does Muck Rack give me the tools I need, they actively work with PR pros and journalists to build community in ways that add value to our work. If you want more information about Muck Rack, visit muckrack.com.
I feel like the pendulum. I feel like the pandemic. One of the outputs of the pandemic was because years ago, there was whole the advent of content creators, and share your own story was the mantra that went out. And that is still a very important tool. You should have an owned media strategy and a plan to grow your social channels, etc. But I feel like when the pandemic hit, it's like there was no content creator whose brand was giving. In other words, there's some information that you desperately really need to know, and the pandemic really shined a bright light on this, that no content creator has a vested interest in like hyping. Yeah. So it might an influencer might be the perfect person to make sure you understand the new flavored cognacs. Totally making that up. I assume they're flavored cognacs. But you know what I mean? It's like, that's all well and good, but there are some topics that no one is going to go out there and cover and build a platform around. And that is and I just feel like journalism took a deep breath, or it got a little bit of more wind in its sails in the pandemic. And I know that journalism and the distrust thing is another issue entirely in our kind of polarized society. We can get into that. But I feel like on the other side of the pandemic, I feel like people are back to valuing unbiased finders of fact a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I feel like there was never it was never going to be the case that like content creation was going to solve all ills. That was never going to be the solution to it. You're always going to need, I think, in a healthy democracy, unbiased finders of fact. And I feel like the ranks of journalists have been bolstered, and just myself in my own kind of solo PR practice, I found a lot of people are returning to the whole like, oh, we need to get some actual press, because if the social media algorithm has become less friendly such that the volume is turned down, so to speak. Well, how much work are you putting into having your executive director write a blog post and then worry about it and then have you edit it, and then he or she's going to nitpick about it, and then you're going to push it out on your social channels, and you're only going to reach a small percentage of your audience. At some point I want to like get scientific and actually crunch the numbers on this, and perhaps you have, but I just feel like it's not that you shouldn't do those things, but if you're a small nonprofit with, like, say, 10 to 20 staffers, and you've got a person who's your one comms person, and they're also wearing a development hat and a volunteer hat, that person could spend a lot of time working on a blog post, or they could reach out to a journalist and probably get a story, an earned story, that reaches tens of thousands of people. And I sometimes feel like we need to get back to understanding that is a great way to get your message out.
Right. And and I would say, and not only does it expand your audience and reach new audiences and give you the numbers that you're looking for, it's also like you're reaching potentially new audiences, and the trust is there. So earned is always, again and again, the most valuable form of media. So, and the most trusted form of media, I should say.
Because it's unbiased.
Right. And if a third party is endorsing, a third party and a third independent party is endorsing your product or sharing your product or talking about your organization in some way, that bolsters trust, which then bolsters, the rest of the marketing funnel, if you will.
Right.
And ultimately impacts your bottom line in a way that paid marketing or owned marketing or social media marketing cannot do.
I couldn't agree more. And then, of course, earned media coverage can then be, throttled through your social media channels the same way owned content can.
Exactly.
And you can emphasize and kind of, augment the kind of validation process of earned media. Let's talk a little bit about the delineation of and this gets to the news literacy piece, because I feel like we can watch two different whole realities now, and I see this playing out, in my own family. The media that certain members of my family consume is just like a narrative that's like, I don't even think is really based in reality, but they're convinced it is. Yeah. And I saw a documentary. It was called "The Best of Enemies." Have you perhaps seen that?
No.
A local Memphis filmmaker made it. It's about the classic Gore Vidal, William F. Buckley debates in the 60s. And what it lays bare was, so I think it was ABC was behind in the ratings, and they were really out of money. And they did no way they could compete with the other networks for presidential news coverage. And they thought, we know what we'll do to save money. We'll get the most prized intellectual on the left and the most famous intellectual on the right and have them debate. And it was really the advent of modern punditry. And when you watch that, and then you know what happens after that, which now it's just that you need any two people that can yell about something and come unglued. Or how do we, I don't know whether we can, but like, how do we reverse this trend? How do we restore? I'm not saying we ever need to get back to Walter Cronkite, that's the way it is. I mean, that's never going to happen, right? But how do we move some way back in that direction so that we can have a common language again?
I think that it's really tricky, and I think that I don't have a solve for it. Mm-hmm. I think what's happening when you're talking about for-profit newsrooms and the dollar driving the news in a lot of places, the problem is that the producers of news in some cases are continuing to create news and information that their readers want to hear or read or engage with. They're building community around news, which is all fine and well, unless you're talking about hard news topics, politics, healthcare, education, government, whatever it is. Like when it comes to those topics, those real, consequential topics, if, it's a dangerous line to be feeding audiences only what they want to hear. So if you're on the left and you read a certain newspaper because you want to see that their opinion or their point of view or their outrage or whatever it is aligns with your views of the world, they're going to just keep feeding that to you. Likewise on the right? It's polarization in each direction. And I think that's a huge problem when a newsroom is compelled to speak a language that in turn builds audiences, that in turn pads their pockets. And that's a huge problem when it comes, that's what I mean by independent journalism. And I think that independent journalism is hard to come by.
Right. I know.
It is. And I think it's hard to do independent journalism, right? So say you are one of the main newspapers in this country and you're trying to report independently about something that's happened. How difficult is it to not see the news through your eye, through your community's eyes, through your staff's eyes? You're talking about big newspapers in large metropolitan areas. Those are going to lean in a certain direction, of course, with a metropolitan worldview. Does that worldview, or even just standards of how by which we behave and think, how does that conflict with a rural worldview?
That's an excellent point.
And how does it influence the coverage? So it's really tricky for these newsrooms and these news leaders to go at things independently and impartially.
And this gets back to the very thing in Best of Enemies, which is it was a cost-saving measure that they did. They didn't have a lot of money, so they think this is the way we can make compelling television without investing a ton of resources. I feel like, and you said it's a rare thing to have, or it's a hard thing to produce independent journalism, but when you see it and you read it, you know it and you value it, right?
Exactly.
And I feel like, but it takes resources.
And where's the resources? Yeah, it's like a gross cycle, right? Everyone's fighting for the ratings and the readership and the subscriptions. And at the meantime, the numbers are all kind of trending downward unless you are, Fox News, the New York Times, these large national outlets with giant readership, viewership, et cetera, giant ad dollars, et cetera. And so where does that leave smaller newsrooms? Where does that leave, non-for-profits, things like that?
Right.
Yeah.
In Memphis, one of our, two of our outlets, MLK 50 and the Daily Memphian, are both nonprofit newsrooms. And lots of people are doing experimentation with this, and like something as venerable as NPR has kind of been that for a long time. What role do you think the nonprofit newsroom, and like I know there are lots of it's essentially a test kitchen, right? People are trying to figure out which version of that is going to provide enough resources to do excellent journalism.
Yeah, I think they're on the rise. I think that there's a lot to be said about the nonprofit image, if you will. Not that it's a fake image, but just the idea of mistrust and distrust in for-profit news organizations, who's paying them, who's funding this kind of news and information, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that they are on the rise, and I think that they can do, like the Marshall Project is a good example. I think that they can do great work. I just think, where does that financing come from? And I know my concern, more than even for nonprofits, is just the local papers, and really just a regard for journalists generally. I think that, did you ever play Life?
Sure.
Yeah. Being a journalist was one of the jobs.
That's
Doctor,
true.
Lawyer, teacher, journalist, right?
Yeah.
These are like the main core jobs. The essential workers, right?
Yeah.
They're the essential workers of a free and independent society, right? You've got healthcare, you've got education, you've got media, press. And I just think that there's got to be some kind of shoe that drops. I don't think that media will ever, I think it's going to continue to consolidate and twist and turn and change. I just think it's a mainstay, and I don't think it'll ever go away.
I don't think it can, or I think we've really lost our way if it does. Yeah. Like, I just think as long as I just can't imagine that anyone would ever give up on that. It is too essential. So this gets us into this whole, like, okay, so it is a paradigm shift, right? Like, the old print model of run of paper advertising is gone, right? And newspapers shot themselves in the foot by not charging for online content and giving people the idea that online news should be free. We all know how that played out. But and now, I guess people are, more accepting of firewalls or paywalls rather. And and I subscribe to the Daily Minute. I subscribe to the Commercial Appeal, subscribe to the New York Times and the Washington Post. I give to my NPR station, because I do care about in-depth news and information. But how do we? But where the ad dollars have gone are to your bigger social media platforms, which even right down to their sharing algorithm. If you're and I know this as a content creator myself, when I share Champions of the Lost Causes podcast episodes, they get less engagement than if I just shared a picture of me with a dog or my kids having a good time at the beach or whatever. And that's to disincentivize you being off the platform. They'd really rather you create content for the platform, which, to your point, increasingly they are doing. It's a place to show up. You should show up there. And we all have to do a bit of that. But from a funding standpoint, from an ad dollar standpoint, is there ever a way you see that local news outlets could somehow, like, it's like, I don't know how you would force that, or like that would require like a law, but it's like ad dollars that used to flow to local journalism now flow to the major social media platforms. How do you fix that?
It's just really tricky. And I think media companies have to do a better job at their own marketing. And it reminds me a lot of like healthcare companies. All companies need to do better at marketing themselves. If you are a local media outlet, unfortunately, you have to invest in a marketing department or bring in a marketing agency. You have to create community around your brand versus your brand on Facebook or your brand on Instagram, right? There are ways out to build audience, which then in turns build subscriptions outside of just sharing news and information. And I think that's why media brands have to be treated as businesses. And one of the number one thing you can invest your money in is marketing. And that includes paid, earned, event marketing, if you're local, creating community around your brand. What does your local papers stand for in your community. It's about educating the public about why they should pay and what their dollar goes to, right? This is how much it costs to make news. So it's almost like so when I was at the New York Times, basically my job from 2011 to 2021 was to create awareness about what goes into making news. So I think a lesson out of that playbook, and the New York Times has been brilliant and been able to grow their subscriber base quarter after quarter for a decade, which is insane. Right? They just keep growing their subscriber base and going against what everybody thinks, that's going to happen to them. But let's take a page out of their playbook for local media. What have they done really well? They're showing people where their dollar goes and why it's important, right? They're building, this is almost like the anti of what I already said before, but like they're building community around, thinking about a free press and how important journalism is. They created an ad campaign about the truth being hard. The truth is hard. And then they extended that and gave that campaign legs. That campaign was huge. The president at the time responded to it. He didn't like it, but he still put it right there where we wanted it to be, which was in the center of the conversation.
Right.
So at the local level, you can do similar things. You can go out and be a part of your community. You can wrap your paper. We subscribe for X amount, and this is what your dollar pays for. This is why a free and independent press is important. Do you want to continue to get this paper? Do you want to know who won the basketball tournament in the community? Do you want to know when the hiking club is meeting? Because it's all right here for you, but it can go away. So I think it's really about creating awareness, creating brand awareness, like local level education, and helping folks understand that without advertising and consumer revenue, the media is not going to be around.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's an excellent point. And as you were talking about the New York Times, I think another thing that they've done an increasingly great job at is podcasts.
Yeah.
I listen to the daily podcast just about every day, and I've gotten to be really fond of Matter of Opinion that comes out on Friday. And then, yes, they have ads within their own podcast, but when they don't have a slot, they advertise their own product.
Right.
And so when you mentioned that ad campaign, I'm like, oh, I heard all those ads.
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't even bother me.
Yeah,
but,
so looking at different mediums, right? Where else can you be? What else can you do? Like classifieds are a dead business. Okay, what can you do in place of that, right? What kind of content resonates with your readers, right? A lot of people are looking for local media to talk about lifestyle and living and community, and not necessarily like, just the school board and the and the new whatever building going up for the town, like expand a little bit, talk about, the local restaurants and the local high school, and the people still have, you can't get that content anywhere else. And people want to know what's going on in their community. Right. And I just think that I definitely just think that there is still value there. You're a local brand, you should be at all the major local events. You see a lot of radio stations that have done really well with that, right? They're still able to command advertising, and radio's held steady, right? It's still, I think, one of the number one way people get their information is radio or something like that. Or the advertising on the radio is like one of the most lucrative businesses. So think about a medium like that. And also like expanding your content. Like you mentioned, the New York Times is going to, they do newsletters, they do podcasts, etc. But, what about, they also launched a great cooking app, right? So and people are paying for access to recipes that from 1975 till now. And they built a whole team around cooking, and people are paying for recipes, which they said no one will ever pay for recipes. Well, there you have it. They are. Right. So there's something about brand and trust too that media can really play into. Like I can open the New York Times app and I know that this community gave this recipe 5 stars. I trust that community of people. Right. Versus blogger ABC got a lot of stars. I'm not sure how this recipe is going to turn out, but I'll try it if it's free. But there's some kind of premium nature to it being
curated. It's curated
and paid. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's almost like journalism back in the day didn't have to market itself. We are the press.
Right.
But now it's like they have to do the same thing that all other companies and organizations do, which is to be effective in explaining the value proposition.
Right. The competition is wild for every industry now. Hospitals are advertising, drug companies have to advertise, media has to advertise. It's not such a given anymore.
That's right.
Everything is changing. So you've got to up your game a little, and you've got to say none of this is going to be handed to me and give it to me. I have to constantly fight for audience. And you're not just fighting other media companies for audience anymore.
That's right. You're fighting all sorts of content creators.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another thing that I've noticed, and this is probably because I'm a band guy and I'm connected to the music scene in Memphis and the film scene and the kind of artist scenes, is that so we talk about news, and it's right to start on the hard news subjects, covering corruption and government, and like we have to have those important checks. But I also feel like that there's a bit of a features news desert, and I feel like that comes about because back in 2008. It was as if okay, newspapers are really short. We got to make some cuts. I don't like it, but we have to make some cuts. Oh, hey, there's this new thing. It's called Facebook. Indie rock bands can promote their own shows. Yeah, it's great. Okay, cut the feature staff. Right? We don't need the feature staff. The musicians can connect directly with their fans. But now, this is another effect of the algorithm changing. You can't make a Facebook event and expect that people are going to show up to your show at the club anymore. Not like you could in your unless, of course, you pay to boost the post. So it's all great for-profit businesses, large companies, and even large nonprofits to have a paid ad budget and a paid ad plan. Smaller nonprofits, your indie rock bands, the grassroots actors, that are just doing a thing with an all-volunteer board, they don't have the money to boost posts. And I just feel so especially if you're a small arts nonprofit, it's like those reporters just kind of aren't out there. Now, I do think that's changing. And if you get creative, and yes, you can find some of that's being filled in by podcasters and smaller, and as long as people are curating content, then it reaches somebody, you've succeeded. It's a placement, right? But I do feel like, and the Daily Memphian is a good example because I've been able to talk to their publisher, and he's like, I know we need to do more about music, film, arts, and culture. It's on our list to grow to get there, but it's just a matter of it's tough, right? And yes, you can curate your own content, and yes, you can do all sorts of guerrilla tactics, flyering for your show, etc. But about 2 years ago, a buddy of mine who's like a singer-songwriter in town, he said, I know this sounds old school, but I don't feel like I'm reaching my audience anymore. Should I start an email newsletter? And of course, industry has found that the newsletter already, but I just think that message or that memo has lagged behind to your kind of musicians who used to do it the old-fashioned way, and then they learned the new social media tactics, and now that's failing them, and they're not getting their audience at their shows. What do you see a broader trend in the market about? Is that just a Memphis phenomenon, or because obviously I've looked through Muck Rack for features reporters, and they're still out there, but I feel like hard news is important, but it is arts and culture and the stuff that recipes, food coverage, that type of stuff is the things that make our life pleasurable, and we can't possibly ingest a steady diet of hard news.
Right.
We've got to have the softer news to kind of balance it all out. So what is if you look in for the next 1 to 2 years for Muck Rack, in your role, what are some things that are on your to-do list? Or we need to do better about that.
Well, I'll say that, we survey journalists every year, and this year more than half are saying they're producing a story every day. and most of them are working over 40 hours a week, almost like hovering around 60, and their pay is stagnated at an average $70K a year for a journalist, no matter how long you've been a journalist, no matter how senior you are. And that's abysmal for the work that they do and the time they're putting in. So it's definitely, something that's happening. But in terms of, what we're focused on at Muck Rack is really AI. I mean, I hate to give you the answer that everyone's giving now, but it's this new technology has the potential to transform newsrooms and how news is made, and not just for news, but also public relations. And I think it will, if followed appropriately and kept in check, it can reduce the amount of time spent on repetitive tasks. It can bring data in and create recommended actions in a way that a human brain might be able to do. So let's just say this doesn't exist, I don't think, but let's just say you have an AI tool in your news publisher on the back end of your website. And it's taking all of the data from your CMS, from your publishing site, in the back end of your news site, and taking all the tags that you have and all this information, and it says, and then you write a news story about something going on that's trending, and then it pulls in data to surface to you as the editor that could influence the story, help the story. You could say to you, remember, we wrote about this 17 years ago. Here are the differences between that story and this story, tell you about the trends. That'll
improve journalism.
Yeah, exactly. It'll save time for folks. Like, it's almost like the recommendations, like, oh, you read this story, you might be interested in this story. Like Netflix says, based on what you've watched, here's a recommendation. So I think the future is in data centralization, and we talk about this a lot at Muck Rack. Same for PR people. If you have all your pitches, your media list, your contacts, your activities, your actions, your metrics, all in one place, the future AIs will be able to make recommended actions to you that really boost your efficiency and help free up your time.
Right.
So I don't really think, the generative AI stuff is really cool and interesting and also very scary. But I think the easier entry into AI is that machine learning and data collection and making recommended actions to make your job easier.
Right.
So instead of having to hire somebody, you buy a tool that has an AI built into it that can do the work for you. Instead of hiring an agency, you can maybe use the tool instead. And that's not to take away from the value of journalism or the journalists or PR professionals. It's just to free up the limited time that we all have to do the job.
The kind of classic 70s representation of a journalist, digging through the microfiche in the library or whatever. That would be kind of more automated. I went to a half-day PRSA seminar at my local Memphis PRSA chapter, and it was a guy who wrote a book about how AI is going to change PR. And the example that sticks out to me, and the thing that really turned my head, and I thought to myself, okay, wow, that's huge, is he said, let's say a government white paper comes out and it's 147 pages, and you need to digest that white paper and give your client who's in the aerospace industry, say it's about rockets and stuff, and you have an aerospace client, and you need to advise them about the things that it's going to affect their business and come up with some strategies of things they ought to pitch. And ChatGPT, the kind of paid version, has an upload tool, and you upload the white paper and it spits out and it goes and digests the white paper now you probably want to go and personalize it and tweak it, but think about how long it would take you to go read a white paper, think about it, and really, it's a huge time saver.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I agree. And I think if you checked out Microsoft's Copilot, it's integrating all of your tools to learn and speak to one another, whether you're in Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, whatever it is. And it's surfacing information for you when you don't know you need it. And it's pretty wild.
That is wild. Now, if I can ever, and I'm sure it will exist if it doesn't already, actually somebody was telling me about a tool, and I'm going to forget the name of it. whereas you would upload your news release and then say, and perhaps your pitch, and then just say, go out there and build my media list for me. I'm sure that exists.
We do. We have that actually. Yeah,
okay.
We have that at Muck Rack.
That's probably one of those notifications. It's like, you want to sign up for this learning? And I was like, I've been too busy lately. But of course, Muck Rack could do that.
Yeah, we have a couple of AI tools. We have a free tool that anybody can use. It's called PressPal. So you put in a prompt and it will generate a press release for you and give you a list of suggested journalists to pitch it to. You can toggle between that and a pitch, and it limits the pitch to 200 words because that's the number that we've seen in our research is ideal for pitching. So you put the prompt in, it spits out some text for you to pitch. And then a whole list it gives you 5 journalists to start. And you can, if you're a customer, you can click through and get all the email addresses and send a pitch right from there. We have this great tool called Recommended Journalists. You have a media list and you're putting it together, and then you can, Recommended Journalist tool kind of overlays and says, hey, based on this list, here are a number of journalists we think you might want to add to this list based on your past lists and things like that. So it really learns off of your data. And then the third one that we released this year is called Coverage Spike Notifications. So based on alerts that you have set up, so say you work for Nike and you have an alert set up for anytime Nike's mentioned in the press, you get an email or a Slack notification. So what it does is if you have an influx in mentions, it will alert you saying you have a spike in coverage, you need to check this out. And whether that could be a bad thing, right? You could be going viral for a negative reason, a crisis. Or it could be like, hey, you're going viral for a good reason. Let's take advantage of the moment. What can you do with this? So that's a really kind of nifty tool for larger enterprises. Yeah, particularly. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
So as we move to close here, Linda, we've talked about the problems in journalism, and we know that the paradigm shift we're continuing to move through it. Wave a magic wand with me and imagine 10 years in the future. I want you to speak to Muck Rack and where you think Muck Rack is, but also just where do you think journalism and the free press will be in 10 years? And imagine that. Let's all hope that the trend lines are more positive. Where might things or if you envision a negative one, go ahead and tell it to me. But where do you think things might go in the industry and with Muck Rack?
Yeah, I would love to see a smarter news consumer emerge from kind of the depths of the hole that we're in at this moment, which is very low trust in media, no understanding between what's real and what's not even the ability to have skepticism for what's real and what's not, right? So just trusting what you read automatically and not looking at who is the source of this information and can they be trusted. So I would love to see that. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think what goes down comes up. And I'm confident that, especially not only just in the rise of fake news, but with the rise of AI bylines and fake publications, I think we're going to see ultimately in time a smarter news consumer. That's what I would like to see. And then in turn with that, perhaps some dollars being funneled into independent newsrooms, because they're understanding we need these independent newsrooms to almost counter all of the garbage that exists on the internet.
It'll almost accentuate the problem in a way that makes it a have to fix.
What's down, it can't just stay down.
Right.
I think that, if you're an optimist, it will bounce back up.
Right.
And there will be harmony and understanding that an influencer is an influencer and a journalist is a journalist. And there's a difference between the two.
Right.
It's almost like, okay, you've got your local witch doctor, or you're going to go to the hospital and get taken care of by a physician. Right. And so I think hopefully that will happen. And then in terms of Muck Rack and our capabilities, I mean, goodness, I would love to see more and more emphasis on PR analytics and proving the value of PR. I would love to see more marketers using public relations software and understanding the importance of public relations in the mix. I would love to see every enterprise company having a chief communications officer sitting right next to their CMO, not the CMO running comms. I would love to see that.
Amen.
Yeah, no hate on a CMO, but you'd never hire a CCO to handle your marketing. So why are you hiring a CMO to handle your comms? They don't understand the team's problems. They don't understand how the sausage is made, and they don't understand the metrics. And then I think that, and then I think that more is to come for the internal comms arm of our industry. And you see this on the upswing already, how important internal communications is to business. And so I think you're going to see more and more businesses relying on internal comms, paying their internal comms leaders more money, and having internal be a really central part of essentially like the office of the CEO, like a chief of staff role. So I think we'll be seeing more of that.
As you were speaking, I think it's almost like when you think about the social media companies in their honeymoon period, and now they've kind of like taken a hit. They're not like the people's opinions about social media companies. And hey, I use the platforms too, right? But they connect us in really interesting ways. But I feel like the honeymoon phase is over, and now that they've really turned the volume knob down on their algorithm, I feel like, and the other ways that they're kind of they're strategically, strengthening their hand. I think it's becoming obvious to people. And I think the trend line you describe, it's not impossible to believe that this is the early phase of that, where the kind of honeymoon phase is over and be like, is it really making our country healthy? Is this who we want to be? I think it kind of does maybe have to get worse before we realize, okay, we really got to fix this.
Right. I mean, the Surgeon General just put a warning label on social media. Did he not? Right. It's as bad as for kids as cigarettes are. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, what anyone's opinion on that is, but it at least is a signal of, and I think people are just more understanding of the damage that it can cause. Listen, it's also a great vehicle.
Sure.
It's giving a voice to the voiceless. Everybody has a platform. There's a lot of stuff bubbling up through social that normally would be maybe potentially not get to those main street media organizations. So I think what it really, in social media, they always try to play, it's all about you. It actually really is all about us. It's all about how we interpret the information that we're giving, and understanding what is real, what is not, what can be trusted, what cannot, and looking a step deeper at what is the source on this, and should I be listening to this person? Right.
Wow. Where can people learn more about Muck Rack?
Oh, they can go to muckrack.com. They can follow me on LinkedIn. I'll follow Muck Rack on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We are everywhere.
That's true.
Yeah.
I was a fan of Muck Rack and a user of Muck Rack before I sat down here today, but I found new reasons to love the platform.
Oh, great.
And I feel that's my spidey sense was tingling that we would have a conversation like this, but this, I'm very heartened by this conversation. And I'm glad to know that you're working at Muck Rack, and that if you have these concerns, and if you're working on that trend line and supporting these two industries that have to work together to better inform each other, then that's encouraging. That's incredibly encouraging.
Good. No, thank you. Thank you for using our platform and for giving me a platform to talk about these topics today.
Absolutely. Linda, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.